The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the military academy's training grounds as Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his worn combat boots. At 28, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from 3 tours overseas with the Marines. His calloused hands bore the marks of countless hours holding a rifle, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen too much for his age. Marcus had arrived at the International Military Exchange Program 6 months ago, representing the United States Marine Corps alongside soldiers from 12 different nations. The program was designed to foster cooperation and understanding between allied forces, but Marcus knew the real reason he was here. After losing his best friend in an IED explosion in Afghanistan, he needed time away from active duty to process the grief that threatened to consume him. The academy grounds buzzed with activity as soldiers from various countries went through their daily routines. Marcus had grown accustomed to the sight of different uniforms, the sound of multiple languages mixing together, and the unique training methods each nation brought to the table. But there was one soldier who had caught his attention from the very first day. Lieutenant James Wellington stood 6 feet tall with perfectly pressed red uniform and gleaming black boots that reflected the sunlight like mirrors. As a member of the British Royal Guard, James carried himself with an almost ceremonial precision that seemed to come naturally to him. Every movement was measured, every gesture deliberate. His blonde hair was cut with military precision, and his blue eyes held an intensity that spoke of unwavering discipline. James had served for 5 years protecting Buckingham Palace and other royal residences. He was known among his peers for his exceptional marksmanship, his ability to remain motionless for hours during ceremonial duties, and his deep respect for tradition and protocol. Unlike Marcus, who had seen the chaos of modern warfare, James's military experience centered on precision, ceremony, and the weight of historical responsibility. The 2 men had barely spoken during their time at the academy, but Marcus had noticed James during training sessions. There was something about the way the British soldier carried himself that both impressed and irritated Marcus. The perfect posture, the unwavering attention to detail, the almost robotic precision in every movement. It reminded Marcus of everything he had once believed about military service before the harsh realities of combat had worn away his idealism. During weapons training, Marcus watched as James methodically cleaned his rifle with the same care one might use to polish a family heirloom. Every part was examined, every surface gleaming. Marcus, in contrast, cleaned his weapon with the efficient motions of someone who had done it 1,000 times in dusty foxholes and makeshift camps. Both approaches were effective, but they represented entirely different philosophies of military service. The tension between them was subtle but noticeable to those who paid attention. During group exercises, they rarely spoke directly to each other, though both demonstrated exceptional skill in their respective areas. Marcus excelled in tactical scenarios that required quick thinking and adaptation, while James dominated in exercises that demanded precision and adherence to protocol. Other soldiers in the program had begun to notice the unspoken rivalry. During mess hall conversations, some would speculate about what would happen if the 2 ever faced each other in direct competition. The Marines had a reputation for aggressive, practical fighting, while the Royal Guard was known for disciplined, technical excellence. It was a classic clash of philosophies wrapped in the personalities of 2 dedicated soldiers. Marcus found himself thinking about his fallen friend David more often when he watched James train. David had been everything Marcus wasn't: methodical, careful, always following protocol to the letter. In many ways, James reminded him of David, and that similarity both drew him toward and pushed him away from the British soldier. The pain of loss was still too fresh, too raw to examine closely. James, for his part, had noticed Marcus's combat experience and the way other soldiers deferred to his practical knowledge. There was a roughness to the American that contrasted sharply with everything James had been taught about proper military bearing. yet he couldn't deny that Marcus possessed skills that came only from real-world experience under fire. The Academy's commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Hayes, had also taken note of the dynamic between the two soldiers. As a career officer with experience managing diverse military units, she recognized the potential for both conflict and growth in such situations. She had been considering how to channel their competitive energy into something productive when an opportunity presented itself. The weekly combat training session was approaching, and Colonel Hayes had planned something special. Instead of the usual group exercises, she had decided to introduce individual challenges that would allow each soldier to demonstrate their unique strengths. She had no intention of creating direct confrontation, but she was curious to see how different military traditions would manifest in practical application. As Marcus finished his evening workout in the Academy's gym, he noticed James at the other end of the facility, moving through a series of precise calisthenics that looked more like a carefully choreographed dance than exercise. The contrast struck him again, where Marcus's workout was intense and focused on building functional strength for combat situations. James's routine seemed designed to maintain the exact physical standards required for his ceremonial duties. The upcoming training session weighed on Marcus's mind as he returned to his quarters. He had heard rumors that it would be different from previous weeks, possibly involving individual demonstrations rather than group work. The thought both excited and concerned him. He had nothing to prove to anyone, but something about James's perfect military bearing challenged his own sense of identity as a soldier. That night, as Marcus lay in his narrow academy bed, he stared at the ceiling and thought about the path that had brought him here, the explosions, the loss, the guilt of survival, the slow process of healing that had led him to this exchange program. He had come here to find peace, not to engage in some pointless competition with a soldier whose biggest worry was probably whether his uniform buttons were properly aligned. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was building between them, something that went beyond simple rivalry. It was as if they represented two different answers to the same fundamental question about what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, to stand for something greater than oneself. The quiet tension that had been building for months felt like it was approaching some kind of resolution, though Marcus couldn't predict what form that resolution would take. The next morning arrived with the crisp clarity that often preceded significant events. Marcus woke before his alarm, as he had every day since arriving at the academy. The habits formed during years of military service didn't simply disappear because he was no longer in active combat zones. He dressed methodically, laced his boots with the same careful attention he had given to preparing for patrol, and made his way to the mess hall. James was already there, sitting alone at a table near the window, eating his breakfast with the same measured precision he applied to everything else. His uniform was, as always, immaculate. Not a thread out of place, not a single wrinkle or spot. Marcus grabbed his tray and, on impulse, walked over to James's table. "Mind if I sit?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the slight rasp that came from years of shouting orders over gunfire and engine noise. James looked up, surprised but maintaining his composure. "Of course, Sergeant Thompson." They ate in relative silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken thoughts filling the space between them. Finally, Marcus set down his fork and looked directly at James. "I've been watching you train," Marcus said. "You're incredibly disciplined." "Thank you," James replied, his British accent crisp and formal. "I've observed your tactical work as well. Your experience shows." It was the most they had ever said to each other directly, yet both men sensed there was more beneath the surface. Marcus found himself studying James's face, looking for some crack in the perfect military facade. Some sign of the human being underneath all that protocol and precision. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "Have you ever been in actual combat? I mean, beyond ceremonial duties?" James stiffened slightly, and Marcus immediately regretted the question. It came out wrong. sounding more like a challenge than genuine curiosity. "My service has been primarily ceremonial and protective," James answered carefully. "But I trained for combat scenarios extensively. Every royal guard must be prepared for real threats." "That's not what I meant," Marcus said quickly. "I didn't mean to imply your service wasn't valuable. I just wondered if you'd ever been in a situation where everything you trained for goes out the window because someone's shooting at you." James studied Marcus's face, noting the slight tremor in his hands that only appeared when he talked about combat, the way his eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the present moment. "No," James admitted. "I haven't experienced that. But I've spent countless hours preparing for the possibility that someone might attempt to harm those under my protection. The weight of that responsibility is something I carry every day." Marcus nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand that James's service carried its own form of pressure, its own type of courage. Standing guard for hours in perfect stillness, knowing that any moment could bring life or death decisions, required a different kind of mental toughness than he had previously considered. "I lost my best friend in Afghanistan," Marcus said suddenly, surprising himself with the admission. "David Martinez. He was a lot like you, actually. Always did everything by the book, never cut corners, believed in the mission completely." James set down his utensils and gave Marcus his full attention. This was clearly painful territory for the American soldier. "He died because he followed protocol," Marcus continued. "We were supposed to wait for backup before entering a building we suspected of housing insurgents. But there were civilians inside, and David couldn't wait. He went in by the book, slow and careful, checking every corner. The bomb went off while he was being methodical about it. If he had just rushed in like I wanted to, maybe he would have gotten out in time." The mess hall continued buzzing with conversation around them, but at their table, silence stretched between the two men. James felt the weight of Marcus's grief and the complexity of the situation he had described. There was no easy answer, no protocol that could have guaranteed a different outcome. "I'm sorry for your loss," James said, and Marcus could hear genuine sympathy in his voice. "But you can't know what would have happened if he had acted differently. Perhaps his careful approach saved those civilians, even if it cost him his life." Marcus looked up sharply, ready to argue, but something in James's expression stopped him. There was no judgment there, no superiority, just a recognition of the impossible choices that soldiers sometimes faced. "Maybe," Marcus said finally, "but it doesn't make it easier to live with." "No," James agreed. "I imagine it doesn't." They finished their breakfast in contemplative silence. As they prepared to leave for the day's training session, James spoke again. "Sergeant Thompson, may I ask you something now?" Marcus nodded. "Why did you tell me about your friend?" Marcus paused at the question, considering his answer carefully. "I guess because I've been watching you for months, and I realized I was judging your whole approach to military service based on my own experiences. That's not fair to you or to David's memory. He believed in doing things the right way, just like you do." "And now?" James asked. "Now I'm curious to see what the right way looks like when it's done by someone who's really good at it." As they walked toward the training facility, both men felt something shift in the dynamic between them. The rivalry was still there, but it had transformed from antagonistic competition to something more like mutual respect and professional curiosity. Colonel Hayes was waiting for them in the main training room, along with the other soldiers in the exchange program. The atmosphere felt different today, more charged somehow. The colonel's expression suggested that whatever she had planned would be more challenging than their usual exercises. "Today we're going to do something different," Colonel Hayes announced to the assembled group. "Instead of group exercises, each of you will participate in individual challenges designed to showcase the unique strengths of your respective military traditions." Marcus and James exchanged a brief glance. After their conversation at breakfast, both men felt more pressure to represent their services well. but also a strange sense of camaraderie. The challenges will test different aspects of military skill, the colonel continued. Marksmanship, tactical decision-making, physical endurance, and mental discipline. Each soldier will rotate through the stations, and we'll see how different training methods and military cultures approach the same fundamental challenges. As the colonel explained the details of each station, Marcus found his competitive instincts awakening. This was exactly the kind of challenge he thrived on. But now, instead of wanting to prove James wrong about something, he found himself genuinely curious about how the Royal Guard's training would translate to these practical tests. James, meanwhile, felt the familiar calm that came over him before important duties. This was his chance to demonstrate that ceremonial soldiers could perform under pressure just as well as combat veterans. But more than that, it was an opportunity to honor the trust Marcus had shown him by sharing his painful memories. The first station was marksmanship, and as fate would have it, Marcus and James were assigned to adjacent shooting positions. As they prepared their weapons, the respectful silence between them was broken by the sounds of other soldiers discussing strategy and technique. "Good luck," Marcus said to James as they took their positions. "And to you," James replied. Neither man realized that their quiet breakfast conversation and this moment of mutual respect had been observed by several of their fellow soldiers. Word was already spreading through the group that something significant was about to happen between the American Marine and the British Royal Guard. The shooting range fell silent as the first group of soldiers took their positions. Marcus felt the familiar weight of the rifle in his hands, muscle memory guiding his movements as he adjusted his stance. Beside him, James moved with ceremonial precision, each motion deliberate and controlled. The contrast in their styles was immediately apparent to everyone watching. Marcus's approach was fluid and practical. His stance was slightly crouched, weight distributed for quick movement if necessary. His breathing was controlled but natural, the rhythm of someone who had learned to shoot accurately while under stress. When he raised the rifle, it seemed to become an extension of his body, moving smoothly into position without conscious thought. James stood perfectly upright, his posture textbook perfect, every angle of his body aligned according to the precise standards he had drilled thousands of times. His breathing followed an exact pattern, measured and methodical. When he raised his weapon, it was like watching a machine designed for this exact purpose. The targets were positioned at varying distances, simulating real-world scenarios where soldiers might need to engage threats at different ranges. As the command to begin was given, both men settled into their shooting rhythm. Marcus fired with steady, confident shots. His training had taught him to be accurate under pressure, to make every shot count when ammunition might be limited and lives depended on his precision. Each shot hit center mass, grouping tightly around the target's vital zones. His technique was efficient, deadly, and proven in combat. James fired with metronomic precision. Each shot was placed with mathematical accuracy, his groupings impossibly tight and perfectly centered. His rate of fire was slower than Marcus's, but every bullet found its mark with surgical precision. Watching him shoot was like watching an artist create a masterpiece, each shot placed with careful consideration and flawless execution. As they progressed through the targets, other soldiers stopped their own exercises to watch. The differences in their approaches seemed to represent something larger than individual technique. Marcus embodied the practical, adaptive nature of modern warfare, while James represented the pinnacle of traditional military precision and discipline. When the shooting portion ended, both men had achieved exceptional scores. Marcus had completed the course faster with excellent accuracy, while James had achieved perfect scores with methodical precision. Neither approach was superior. They were simply different answers to the same challenge. The next station tested tactical decision-making through a series of simulated scenarios. Soldiers were presented with complex situations requiring quick analysis and decisive action. Marcus approached these challenges with the instinctive responses developed through real combat experience. He could read a tactical situation quickly, identify threats and opportunities, and make decisions based on practical knowledge of what worked under fire. James tackled the same scenarios with careful analysis and adherence to established tactical principles. His responses were thoughtful, considering multiple variables before committing to a course of action. Where Marcus relied on intuition honed by experience, James applied systematic thinking and comprehensive training. During one particularly complex scenario involving hostage rescue, their different approaches created an interesting dynamic. Marcus immediately identified the most direct route to neutralize threats and secure civilians, focusing on speed and aggression to minimize exposure time. James analyzed the scenario more comprehensively, considering multiple approach routes, backup plans, and potential complications. When asked to explain their reasoning, Marcus spoke about the importance of decisive action and the psychological advantage of rapid, overwhelming force. James discussed risk mitigation, coordination with support elements, and the value of methodical execution to prevent costly mistakes. Colonel Hayes observed both presentations with interest. As an experienced officer, she recognized the value in both approaches. Modern military operations often required the flexibility to employ different tactics depending on the specific situation and available resources. The physical endurance station proved to be another revealing test of their different training philosophies. The course was designed to simulate the physical demands of extended military operations, including obstacle navigation, equipment carries, and sustained physical exertion. Marcus attacked the course with the aggressive energy of someone accustomed to pushing through physical barriers when survival depended on it. His movements were efficient but forceful, powered by the kind of determined endurance that came from knowing that failure meant people died. He had learned to push his body beyond its limits because the alternative was unacceptable. James approached the course with controlled, sustainable effort. His pace was measured, his energy expenditure calculated to maintain consistent performance throughout the entire challenge. Every movement was optimized for efficiency, every step planned to conserve energy while maintaining steady progress. His endurance was the product of disciplined training designed to maintain peak performance over extended periods. As they progressed through the obstacles, their different strategies became apparent. Marcus surged ahead during the more physically demanding sections, using explosive bursts of energy to overcome challenges quickly. James maintained a steady pace that seemed less impressive initially, but proved remarkably sustainable over the entire course. By the halfway point, Marcus had built a significant lead, but the sustained nature of the course began to favor James's methodical approach. The British soldiers' consistent pace and energy management allowed him to close the gap steadily, while Marcus's early aggression began to exact a toll on his endurance. The final section of the course required participants to carry heavy equipment while navigating complex obstacles, simulating the need to transport essential gear under difficult conditions. Marcus's combat experience served him well here, as he had carried wounded comrades and critical supplies under similar physical stress. But James's ceremonial training, which required maintaining perfect composure and bearing for hours while wearing heavy formal gear, had prepared him for exactly this type of sustained physical challenge. They finished the course within seconds of each other, both having pushed themselves to their limits. As they caught their breath at the finish line, there was a moment of mutual recognition. Each had witnessed the other's dedication, skill, and physical courage under demanding conditions. "Well done," James said between breaths, extending his hand to Marcus. "You too," Marcus replied, accepting the handshake with genuine respect. The final station was designed to test mental discipline and emotional control under stress. Soldiers were subjected to various psychological pressures while attempting to complete complex tasks requiring focus and precision. This was perhaps the most revealing test of their different military cultures and personal characters. The exercise involved maintaining concentration on detailed tasks while being subjected to distractions, time pressure, and simulated stress conditions. Loud noises, flashing lights, and verbal pressure from instructors were designed to simulate the sensory overload and psychological pressure of combat situations. Marcus drew on his experience dealing with the chaos and unpredictability of real combat. He had learned to focus on essential tasks while filtering out irrelevant distractions to maintain tactical awareness while under extreme stress. His approach was to accept the chaos and work within it, using controlled aggression and decisive action to cut through confusion. James relied on his training in maintaining ceremonial composure under public scrutiny and potential threat. Hours of standing perfectly still while crowds pressed close, maintaining alertness for security threats while projecting calm authority, had taught him to maintain internal control regardless of external pressures. His approach was to create a zone of calm precision within himself, executing tasks with methodical perfection despite surrounding chaos. Both men performed exceptionally well, though their methods differed significantly. Marcus completed tasks quickly and efficiently, adapting his approach as conditions changed. James maintained consistent performance throughout, his execution remaining precise and controlled regardless of the increasing pressure. As the final exercise concluded, all the soldiers gathered to discuss their experiences and observations. The atmosphere was thoughtful rather than competitive. Everyone had witnessed demonstrations of different military excellence, each valuable in its own way. Colonel Hayes addressed the group with evident satisfaction. The day had accomplished exactly what she had hoped, showcasing the diverse strengths that different military traditions brought to the modern alliance while building mutual respect among the participants. The evening that followed the training exercises was different from any other at the academy. Word of the day's events had spread throughout the facility, but not in the way anyone might have expected. There was no talk of winners and losers, no boasting about superior performance or training methods. Instead, a profound sense of respect and understanding seemed to permeate the conversations among all the international soldiers. Marcus found himself walking the academy grounds alone as the sun set, processing the day's events. The competitive fire that had driven him for months had been replaced by something more complex and meaningful. He had learned something important about himself and about the nature of military service that extended far beyond his own experiences. James appeared beside him on the walking path, having apparently had the same idea about needing time to think. They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, both men lost in their own reflections about what had transpired. "I owe you an apology," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. "For what?" James asked, genuinely surprised. "For judging your approach to military service based on my own limited perspective. I spent months thinking that ceremonial duty somehow made you less of a soldier than someone who'd seen combat. Today showed me how wrong I was." James considered this for a moment before responding. "I think I owe you an apology as well. I looked at your combat experience and assumed it was just controlled aggression without the discipline and precision that I valued. But watching you today, I realized that your approach requires its own form of discipline, one that I'm not sure I could master." They paused at a bench overlooking the academy's main courtyard, where soldiers from various nations were engaged in informal conversations and activities. The scene represented exactly what the exchange program was designed to achieve: different military cultures learning from each other and building mutual understanding. "You know what struck me most about today?" Marcus continued. "It wasn't the competition between us. It was watching you maintain that incredible precision under pressure and realizing that it takes just as much courage to commit to perfect execution as it does to charge into an unknown situation. And I was impressed by your ability to adapt and make decisions under chaos," James replied. The kind of quick thinking and situational awareness you displayed can't be taught in a classroom. It comes from facing real uncertainty and learning to trust your judgment when lives depend on it. Marcus laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. The irony is that David, my friend who died, would have loved to meet you. He always believed that the right way to do something was worth the extra effort, even when shortcuts were available. You would have understood each other perfectly. Tell me more about him, James said. Marcus spent the next hour sharing stories about David Martinez, painting a picture of a soldier who embodied the best qualities of both military traditions. David had possessed Marcus's courage and adaptability while maintaining James's commitment to excellence and protocol. As Marcus spoke, James began to understand the deep pain that had driven the American soldier to this exchange program. He sounds like he was an exceptional soldier and friend, James said when Marcus finished. His loss must have shaken your faith in everything you believed about military service. It did, Marcus admitted. I couldn't understand how doing everything right could still lead to such a wrong outcome. But watching you today, seeing how your precision and discipline serve a larger purpose, I'm starting to understand that David's approach wasn't wrong. It was just different from mine. James nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps the real lesson is that effective military service requires different approaches for different situations. Your friend's methodical approach might have saved those civilians, even as it cost him his life. Your adaptive approach has likely saved countless lives in situations where quick action was essential. And your approach, Marcus added, maintains the standards and traditions that give meaning to our service in the first place. As the night grew darker, other soldiers began to approach their bench. First came Sergeant Chen Wei from the Chinese People's Liberation Army, who had observed the day's events with professional interest. Then Lieutenant Sarah Okafor from the Nigerian Army, who had been particularly impressed by the mutual respect displayed during the exercises. Soon, a small group had gathered, representing 7 different nations and military traditions. The conversation naturally turned to the day's events and what they had learned from watching Marcus and James demonstrate their respective approaches to military excellence. You two did something important today, Sergeant Chen observed. You showed us that competition between allies should be about learning from each other, not proving superiority. I've been in 3 different international exchanges, Lieutenant Okafor added, and I've never seen anything quite like what happened today. Usually, these things turn into arguments about whose military is better. Instead, you both demonstrated why all of our militaries are valuable. As the conversation continued, it became clear that the day's events had affected everyone who witnessed them. Soldiers shared insights about their own military cultures and how observing different approaches had changed their perspectives on training and service. Colonel Hayes appeared at the edge of the group, drawn by the animated but respectful discussion taking place. She had spent her career managing diverse military units and had rarely seen such a positive example of international cooperation and mutual learning. I hope you all realize what you've accomplished here, she said, joining the circle. This is exactly why programs like this exist. You've demonstrated that strength comes not from uniformity, but from understanding and respecting different approaches to common goals. Marcus and James exchanged a look across the circle. Both men understood that something significant had happened between them, something that extended beyond their individual rivalry to represent a larger truth about military service and international cooperation. As the group began to disperse for the night, James approached Marcus once more. Sergeant Thompson, I have a request. What's that? I'd like to learn more about your tactical approach. Perhaps you could show me some of the decision-making methods you used in Afghanistan. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile James had seen from him since arriving at the academy. I'd be honored to share what I know, but only if you'll teach me about that incredible precision and discipline you demonstrated today. It's a deal, James replied, extending his hand. As they shook hands, both men realized that their quiet duel had ended not with a victor and defeated, but with two soldiers who had found something valuable in each other's approach to service. The rivalry that had defined their relationship for months had transformed into a partnership that would make both of them better soldiers. The remaining weeks of the exchange program took on a different character. Marcus and James began training together regularly, each teaching the other techniques and perspectives from their respective military traditions. Marcus learned to appreciate the value of methodical precision and attention to detail, while James discovered the importance of adaptability and quick decision-making under pressure. Their collaboration became a model for the entire program. Other international soldiers began forming similar partnerships, sharing knowledge and techniques across national and cultural boundaries. The Academy's training sessions became more collaborative and less competitive, focused on mutual improvement rather than proving superiority. When the exchange program concluded 3 months later, Marcus and James had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to military excellence. They maintained correspondence after returning to their respective duties, sharing insights from their ongoing service and supporting each other through the unique challenges each faced. Marcus returned to active duty with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of what David's sacrifice had meant. He incorporated lessons learned from James about precision and methodical execution, becoming a more complete soldier while maintaining his adaptability and quick thinking. James returned to his ceremonial duties at Buckingham Palace with a broader perspective on military service and a deeper appreciation for the courage required in combat situations. His experiences with Marcus had given him new confidence in his ability to adapt and make quick decisions if real threats ever materialized. Years later, both men would look back on their time at the Academy as a turning point in their military careers and personal development. The quiet duel that had begun with unspoken rivalry and mutual misunderstanding had ended with a demonstration that left everyone speechless, not because of what they had proven about themselves, but because of what they had learned about each other. Their story became part of the Academy's tradition, cited by instructors as an example of how international military cooperation should work. It demonstrated that strength came not from proving one approach superior to another, but from understanding how different approaches could complement each other to achieve common goals. The emotional impact of their transformation resonated with soldiers from all nations who heard their story. It reminded them that beneath the different uniforms, languages, and traditions, they all shared the same fundamental commitment to service, sacrifice, and the protection of others. In a world often divided by competition and conflict, Marcus and James had shown that understanding and respect could transform rivalry into partnership and difference into strength.